aloud as a clergyman read Psalm 35. When George Washington became president in 1789, one of his first official acts was to ask the blessing of the great author of every public and private good. The Bible was an indispensable source of instruction for the founders. In the 18th century, a time when books were still relatively scarce, if an American family owned one volume, it was likely to be the Bible. Those who could read knew whole passages by heart. The founders naturally looked to the Bible for guiding principles. Professor Donald Lutz of the University of Houston examined the founders' writings and counted the times they cited authorities to bolster their arguments. Out of 3,154 citations, nearly 1,100, 34%, are to the Bible, far more than any other source of authority. Every American colonist who opened a Bible found this remarkable truth. God knows every individual's name, and He loves even the lowliest of His creatures. It was an idea that had taken root in the Jewish faith centuries earlier. The ancient Hebrew people had come to believe that each human being is important to God, that each matters equally in His eyes. In the days of Abraham and Isaac, a time of cultures that believed in many ruthless gods who killed men for sport, that was a radical thought. Later religions, including Christianity, took up and spread this idea that all are equal in God's sight. In 1776, that deeply spiritual belief became the basis for the American ideal, spelled out in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. Religion was a roadmap to the achievement of real equality. The founders believed that all men are born with certain rights that are not subject to the whims of kings, such as the right to life and the right to control one's own property. These rights, the founders believed, came not from the minds of men nor from governments, but from God. As the Declaration famously puts it, all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. This firm belief in God-given rights runs throughout American history. President John F. Kennedy, in his 1961 inaugural address, reminded the nation that the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. Why is freedom of religion crucial in America? One of the unalienable rights named in the Declaration is the right to liberty. The founders believed that God creates all people to be free. He endows them with free will, the freedom to choose between right and wrong, to live a good life, to live to their fullest potential. Freedom, then, is a sacred gift. The founders were determined to set up a government that would not take it away from people, as so many kings and tyrants had done. The founders realized that if American democracy was to work, it would need religion as an ally. Here's why. A government elected by the people relies on the people to make good decisions. Making good decisions takes wisdom and virtue. Therefore, a successful democracy requires a citizenry of sound moral character. The founders believed that religion provides the best anchor for such national character. This is not to say the founders believed that only religious individuals could possess good character. But they knew that religion helps people be good, and they were convinced that their experiment in self-government would fail without a religious population. George Washington put it this way: "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports." Or, as John Adams wrote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." The founders made freedom of religion a fundamental principle for the new country. The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The founders decided not to establish a national church or to favor any particular religion, as England and other nations had done. In their view, that was the best way to keep religion and civil government from interfering with each other. They wanted Americans to be a religious people, but they realized that a government that tried to force religion on citizens was asking for trouble. Faith is a matter of the heart and soul, and if worship is not given freely, it is not true faith. Liberty is the ground on which faith can grow. James Madison put it this way: "The religion, then, of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man, and it is the right of every man to exercise it as these may dictate. It is the duty of every man to render to the Creator such homage and such only as he believes to be acceptable to him." For all of these reasons, religious liberty is a pillar of American freedom. It is the foundation of the American ideals of human equality, human dignity, and freedom of conscience. Take it away, take away a person's right to seek spiritual truth, and all other freedoms are at risk. Why do some liberals want crosses and Christmas trees out of publicly owned places? During the past several decades, the far left has tried to drive religion out of America's public square. Some on the left simply don't like religion and will do whatever they can to oppose it. Others say we should ban displays of religion in publicly owned areas to preserve freedom. Radical secularists, as they're sometimes called, argue that to protect freedom, including the freedom of those who don't believe in God, government must have absolutely nothing to do with religion, and vice versa. For example, secularists have tried in court to strike "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance, remove religious symbols such as nativity scenes and crosses from public parks, ban the display of the Ten Commandments in courthouses, stop legislatures and school boards from opening their sessions with prayers, stop public schools from beginning the day with a moment of silence for private prayer or meditation, ban Christian clubs from meeting on public school campuses, and stop ministers from praying at school graduation ceremonies. Courts have issued conflicting rulings in these types of cases, which has created much confusion about what is legal. Fear of being politically incorrect has led to textbooks avoiding references to religion and Christmas trees being renamed holiday trees. Public schools and colleges are places where political correctness often thrives. Consider a few recent examples. In a Pennsylvania school, a teacher seized a little boy's Valentine's Day cards because they contained a message about Jesus. In Montgomery County, Maryland, the school board voted to strip all references to religious holidays from the school calendar, including Christmas and Easter, as well as Jewish holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and replace them with terms like winter break and no school for students and teachers. Purdue University in Indiana stopped a donor from putting the word God on a plaque honoring his parents, out of concern that it might offend someone. The University of Wisconsin removed all Bibles from rooms in a lodge it owns to make sure all guests are comfortable. Unfortunately, these kinds of incidents are not rare. Conservatives view them as badly misguided. The founders wrote the First Amendment to protect religion from government interference, not to discourage religious expression. Scrubbing religion from public places sends the message that religion does not deserve much respect. It sends a message that says, in effect, faith is not welcome here. Why should religious symbols be displayed in public places when there are a lot of people who don't believe? Most people want displays of religion like nativity scenes or menorahs in public squares for good reasons. For most Americans, they are expressions of who we are, symbols of the deepest meanings of life. They remind us of our finest ideals and values. They celebrate the fact that we have freedom of religion. We should always recognize that in a public setting there are people of different beliefs. As Americans, we respect each other's faiths, as well as the right of anyone who chooses not to believe in God. That means, for example, that public schools must not preach religion or force children to pray. But there is a difference between a government that remains neutral about religion and a government that acts as though religion is a radioactive topic. There is a difference between being sensitive to other people's beliefs and being intolerant of people expressing their faith. In this country, the danger is not that religions will go around forcing themselves on people. Americans have little tolerance for that. In the view of many conservatives, the greater danger is that the federal government will use its power to interfere with religion. The larger government gets, and the more control it seeks over people's lives, the larger the risk that it will restrict freedom of religion. That's why conservatives stand up against the idea of driving faith out of the public square. As the Reverend Billy Graham once said, "The framers of our Constitution meant we were to have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion." Aren't conservatives wrong to say this is a Christian nation when there are so many faiths here? This is a Christian nation in that 3 out of 4 Americans identify themselves as Christians. It is a Judeo-Christian nation in that its founding principles are rooted in Jewish and Christian religions, as discussed above. Those principles still make us who we are. But it is not a Christian nation in the sense that it was founded for Christians only, or that the government favors Christianity over any other religion. Scores of faiths, denominations, and creeds flourish here, since immigrants from all over the world have brought their beliefs to America with them. Thanks to our principles of freedom, religious Americans are remarkably tolerant of others' faiths. In many ways, the United States is a very religious country. 9 out of 10 people say they believe in God. About a third of Americans say they attend worship services weekly. 1/5 of Americans are not affiliated with any religion. Does religion make America a better place? Absolutely. Religion has been, on balance, an enormous force for good throughout the country's history. The longing to worship God freely gave the Pilgrims and other colonists the strength to endure the long, hard task of settling in a new world. The movement to abolish slavery in the 19th century was spearheaded largely by ministers and others who believed that slavery was an offense to God. During the 1950s and 1960s, congregations led by ministers like Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. were at the forefront of the struggle for civil rights. Take a look at almost any American community, and you'll see congregations doing good in all kinds of ways, from building houses for the poor to delivering meals to the elderly. People who take a dim view of organized religion often don't realize just how much good churches and temples do, perhaps because they haven't made the effort to look. Such work is a big reason why Americans give more than $100 billion a year, about a third of all their charitable giving, to religious institutions. Today, we know that the founders were right in their belief that religion helps make people better citizens. For example, studies show that teens who take their religion seriously are less likely to use drugs and get involved in delinquent behavior like vandalism. Modern culture poses challenges for religion. We Americans live in a world of endless shopping opportunities and on-demand access to television, movies, and social media. In a society crowded with products and amusements, it's easy to neglect the spiritual side of life. But as the founders knew, human beings are at their core moral and spiritual beings. For most people, faith is the anchor of morality. Religion helps us see life as something sacred and beyond the material. It helps us be honest, hard-working, responsible people. It prompts us to be less self-centered and to treat each other with kindness and decency. It offers a sense of greater purpose. Our lives become poorer when we neglect our spiritual nature. All this is why conservatives believe that the more churches, synagogues, and other houses of worship flourish, the better off the country is. It's why conservatives stand up for religious traditions and why they believe it's important to remember where our blessings and freedoms come from. As George Washington wrote, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States." Abortion. Abortion is the forced ending of a pregnancy resulting in the death of the embryo or fetus. In other words, the death of a developing baby. Most conservatives share a deep concern about abortion. This chapter explains why. The reality of abortion is harsh. It can be tough even to read about it. But reading in some detail is important because the language used in abortion debates, terms like choice, options, and terminating a pregnancy, often obscures what's actually happening. Here are some procedures used in abortion clinics. During the first trimester of a woman's pregnancy, clinics often use a technique called suction aspiration. A suction tube with a sharp cutting edge is inserted into the mother's womb to pull and tear the baby's developing body from the wall of the uterus. It sucks the baby's remains along with blood and fluids into a collection bottle. RU-486, the French abortion pill, is a chemical technique also used by abortion clinics during the first trimester. The pills block the action of progesterone, which is essential to maintaining the nurturing environment of the uterus, causing the baby to starve to death. A second drug, misoprostol, taken days later, stimulates powerful uterine contractions to expel the embryonic baby's remains. After taking the second drug, most women abort over the next few hours, but others may take days or weeks to abort. Dilation and evacuation is a procedure used during the second or even third trimester. It often begins with the administration of a chemical agent to kill the developing child. The abortionist then uses a gripping tool called a tenaculum to grab, twist, and tear away parts of the baby's body until it is pulled from the womb piece by piece. When the body is removed intact, perhaps with forceps grabbing the legs to pull out the entire body, the procedure is called dilation and extraction, or intact dilation and evacuation. Because the child's skull has often hardened to bone, the abortionist must sometimes crush it before removal. Chemical abortion methods performed in the second or third trimester use drugs to trigger powerful, painful contractions that expel the child and placenta. As with surgical abortion, the abortionist may inject a chemical agent into the amniotic fluid, the umbilical cord, or into the fetus itself to make sure the child is dead before delivery. Most people don't like to discuss the topic of abortion in this much detail. It makes them very uncomfortable, and when you know the procedures used, you can understand why. It's a deeply troubling experience involving untold loss and sorrow. But it's an issue that deserves careful thought. Why do many Americans believe that abortion is deeply wrong? Because they believe that abortions kill helpless unborn babies and often cause great pain to their mothers, and because this is a moral issue that tells us what kind of society we are. Do we have a culture that values human life, or one that regards it as disposable? This nation was founded on the idea that every individual life has value. The Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That idea sets us apart from regions of the world where rulers treated life as something cheap and expendable. If we still believe that every life has value, then protecting life is our moral duty. And conservatives believe it should be the legal duty of our government. There is a lot of talk in this country about saving things. Save the polar bears, save the trees, save the oceans. Conservatives want to remind the country about saving unborn children. Are they worth less than polar bears and trees? Some people believe there is a category of unborn children definitely not worth saving, babies who are going to be born with mental or physical disabilities. They believe those babies should be aborted for their own good, and the good of us all. In 2014, Richard Dawkins, a famous evolutionary biologist, answered a woman who wrote on Twitter that she wouldn't know what to do if she were pregnant with a kid with Down syndrome. Dawkins tweeted, "Abort it and try again. It would be immoral to bring it into the world if you have the choice." Think about the cruelty of that statement for a minute. You may know or have met someone with Down syndrome. If so, You know that children with Down syndrome can live rewarding lives and bring much love, joy, and inspiration to others. Would you be willing to say, "You should never have been born," to such a person? What other imperfections should disqualify someone from being born? A cleft palate? A missing limb? A heart defect? Who sets the standards about who lives and who dies? Conservatives may be the most outspoken about abortion, but the truth is that just about everyone who thinks about the issue is deeply troubled over it. A solid majority of Americans say they oppose abortion in all or most cases. Even abortion rights advocates sometimes speak of wanting the procedure to be safe, legal, and rare. Why would they want it to be rare unless some part of them recognizes the tragedy involved? What is Roe v. Wade? Roe v. Wade is a 1973 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court that made abortion legal throughout the country. The court decided that every woman has a constitutional right to abortion. Many people mistakenly believe that the Supreme Court made abortion legal only during the first trimester of pregnancy, the first through third months. In fact, the court created an almost unlimited right to abortion throughout a woman's entire pregnancy. Here's how that works. The court ruled that until a child becomes viable, until it can live outside the womb, a woman can have an abortion for any reason she wants. After a fetus becomes viable, an abortion is still legal if a doctor says it's necessary to protect the mother's health. But here's the catch. In a companion case called Doe v. Bolton, the court defined health as all factors, physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being of the patient. In other words, just about anything you can imagine that might affect someone's well-being in any way. For example, an abortion doctor could say that giving birth would cause a woman stress, and that would be enough to justify an abortion. In this way, the Supreme Court instituted a nationwide policy of access to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. What's the result of Roe v. Wade? About 1 million abortions are performed in the United States every year. Thankfully, that number is down from a peak of 1.6 million in 1990. It is still a staggering, heartbreaking number. Well over 50 million abortions were performed in the 4 decades following the Supreme Court's ruling, about 40 times the number of Americans lost in all of this nation's wars. Many conservatives believe Roe v. Wade is one of the worst rulings in Supreme Court history, wrong morally and wrong in legal reasoning. Nowhere does the Constitution describe a right to abortion. This is a case of judges inventing law rather than interpreting laws as written. The court should overturn its own ruling and let the people of each state decide this crucial issue through their legislatures. What business do pro-lifers have telling women what they can do with their own bodies? Forcing a woman to have a child is morally wrong. It's a private matter between a woman and her doctor. Abortion is a woman's choice. It's her body. These are arguments made by pro-choice advocates, as abortion rights supporters call themselves. They often say or imply that being against abortion is anti-woman. They'll even argue that the pro-life movement is part of a war on women. In truth, abortion is often dangerous for women's physical and psychological health. Even if abortion leaves a woman unscarred, it's not simply a question of the woman controlling her own body. There is another life involved, the life of the unborn child. If we believe in the value of human life, then we have to take that child into account as well. What you are calling a child is not a human life, pro-choice advocates might argue. It's not a person yet, so it's all right to abort it. Recent advances in science have done much to demolish the argument that an unborn child is just a blob of tissue. For more on the scientific evidence, see the next question. Even without science, common sense and ethics tell us that there's something wrong with the "it's not a human life" claim. Before you were born, you were inside your mother's womb. You were less developed than you are now, just as an infant is less developed than a teenager, but you were you. There was nothing else in the womb that you swapped places with before birth. That was you. If you were not a human life, what in the world were you? There is a reason mothers say, "I'm having a baby," when they're pregnant. They know they're carrying more than a blob of tissue inside. They're carrying exactly what they say, a baby. Sometimes women face serious health concerns that require agonizing decisions about having an abortion. But the fact is that at least 9 out of 10 abortions in this country are elective procedures involving healthy women with healthy unborn babies. The most common reasons women give for having abortions are that they're not ready for a child, or the timing is wrong, or they can't afford a baby now. The question is, are those good reasons for ending a life? Women who decide against abortion need to hear a message from family, friends, and community that says, "You are not alone. We love you and will help you." Women who decide they cannot raise a child need to know there are many families in America who would love to adopt children. This is not a war on women or anyone else. It's a matter of saving lives. What does science have to say about the beginning of human life? Thanks to advances in medical research, scientists know a lot about how a baby grows in the womb, and they're learning more every day. It's getting harder and harder for abortion supporters to say, "That's not a human life." When a human sperm enters and joins a human ovum, egg, a living human embryo comes into being. From the very beginning, that embryo has a genetic composition that is distinctly human. When you were in your mother's womb, even at that early stage, your DNA contained the design that makes you unique: your blood type, your height, the color of your hair and eyes, the shape of your nose. Human development proceeds at an amazingly fast rate. By about the 6th week of pregnancy, a baby's tiny heart has started to beat. By week 7, the baby's body is forming every organ he or she will need, including lungs, liver, kidneys, and intestines. Little arms and legs are starting to grow. At 8 weeks, a tiny face is appearing, with the beginnings of 2 eyes, a nose, ears, and mouth. By week 10, connections are forming inside the brain. At 12 weeks, little teeth, fingers, and toes have formed. By 22 weeks of gestation, and possibly earlier, an unborn child can feel pain. This raises disturbing questions about what a baby experiences during an abortion. At 23 weeks, it's possible for a baby to survive outside the womb. More than 90% of babies born at 27 to 28 weeks in the United States survive a premature birth. People can always have political, philosophical, and religious debates about when life inside the womb becomes a person or fully human. But search online for sonogram of baby and take a few minutes to look at some pictures. Or look at your own sonogram taken when you were in your mother's womb if it's available. When you see those pictures, you realize that we're talking about human beings. The evidence is there, before your eyes. Those who are still not sure might want to ask themselves, isn't erring on the safe side the right thing to do? If we're not exactly sure when human life begins, shouldn't we take care to protect what may be life? Meanwhile, the scientific evidence keeps building. It deserves serious, thoughtful consideration. How does abortion affect women? Abortion can cause short-term and long-term physical problems for women. Possible short-term consequences include cervical lacerations, uterine perforations, bleeding, hemorrhage, serious infection, pain, and incomplete abortion. Possible long-term physical consequences include an increased risk of premature birth in future pregnancies. More damaging, perhaps, are the emotional and psychological suffering many women experience after an abortion, sometimes lasting for years. Abortion increases the risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Abortion rights supporters like to present abortion as an act of empowerment for women, something that allows them to control their own destinies. Liberal icon Gloria Steinem, who had an abortion at age 22, once said, "Speaking for myself, I knew it was the first time I had taken responsibility for my own life. I wasn't going to let things happen to me. I was going to direct my life, and therefore it felt positive." A great many women who have had abortions do not share Ms. Steinem's feelings. They'll tell you they feel anything but positive about their experience. You can find their stories on the websites of organizations like the Silent No More Awareness campaign, www.silentnomoreawareness.org, where thousands have written about the grief and sense of loss abortion can bring. My heart is still broken for what I did. It also is broken for the little life that I will never know this side of heaven. I am 65 years old now, but I will never forget that day. I often think about her, what she would look like, her personality, and if we would be close. If I could do it over, I would have kept her. I felt regret immediately. I look back and I don't know why I didn't go to my parents, a counselor, or someone from church. I don't know. Regret doesn't even begin to describe how terrible I felt. Some time ago, one of this book's co-authors, Bennett, addressed a pro-life dinner and asked how many women there had had an abortion. About 80% raised their hands. Those women became pro-life because they had learned something in a very personal, difficult way. They know the tragedy of abortion. They ask all of us to think very seriously about what it means and what's at stake. K-12 education. Belief in the power of education is a deeply rooted American value. Thomas Jefferson held that the diffusion of knowledge among the people was crucial to the American experiment. No other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness, he wrote. Jefferson and the other founding fathers emphasized the importance of skills like reading, writing, and calculating, as well as knowledge of subjects like history, geography, and science. They designed this country to be a place where a free people can use what they learn to make good, prosperous lives. The founders knew that academics aren't all there is to education. Jefferson wrote that good schooling involves the improvement of one's morals and faculties. That is, good schools teach character. They help students learn virtues like honesty, dedication, and respect. The founders also understood that schools should help students learn the values, knowledge, and skills they need to become responsible Americans. The objects of education, Jefferson wrote, are to instruct the mass of our citizens in their rights, interests, and duties as men and citizens. Good schools help make citizens who love their country, know about democratic ideals, and are not afraid to stand up for them. Otherwise, the American Republic cannot survive. Just about everyone has an opinion about education issues. That's partly because everyone has experience with school, either public school, private school, religious school, or homeschool. We've all run into great and not so great teachers, textbooks, and classes. We've formed ideas based on first-hand knowledge about what can be good and bad about an education. We all have an ownership in American education, even after we graduate. Many of us have children or grandchildren who are in school, or we will someday. The health of our communities, our economy, and our whole country depends on our schools. Even the property values of our homes are tied to the reputation of nearby schools. Given all this, it's easy to understand why education issues are often debated with passion. They should be. There is a lot at stake, and there is much work to be done. Does America do a good job educating its students? It would be a wonderful thing if most children in this great nation received great educations. Unfortunately, they don't. More than half of high school seniors taking the ACT or SAT don't have the skills they need to succeed in college. According to national tests, about 6 in 10 high school seniors can't read well. 3 out of 4 seniors can't do math as well as they should. On international tests, American 15-year-olds score below average in math, ranking behind many other countries such as Japan, Korea, France, Poland, and Latvia. American students score only average in science and reading compared to other countries. The American education system faces serious, complex problems. If things don't improve, it could mean a dimmer future for the United States. Good jobs require good educations, and people who can barely read and write face a lifetime of financial struggle. The nation as a whole can't prosper as it has if other countries' citizens know more and can do more than we can. Americans recognize this and have been trying to improve schools for more than 3 decades, with limited success. As the numbers above show, we have a long way to go. Why is K-12 education in America mediocre? Part of the problem, a big part in fact, lies not with our schools, but with events and trends taking place in our culture. The greatest threat to education is the breakdown of the American family. When large numbers of children grow up without fathers, or in households where single parents struggle to get through the day, or in households where adults aren't paying attention to their kids, schools feel it. If you ask teachers what would most improve American education, you hear one answer over and over. They say, "We need more parental involvement." You've likely been in classrooms where teachers have to deal with students who don't know how to behave because there is no one at home to teach them good habits. Or students who don't turn in homework because no one checked to make sure it was done. The less discipline and help kids get at home, the harder it is for schools to teach those students. Another problem is all the distractions outside the classroom. American teens spend more than 7.5 hours a day watching TV, listening to music, social networking, surfing the web, and playing video games. That compares to less than an hour a day doing homework. Those numbers alone go a long way toward explaining things. This isn't to say that schools are blameless. Too many have low academic standards. They set low expectations for students, and students learn to get by with little effort. Textbooks, tests, and assignments are watered down. Teachers let students make posters or draw pictures instead of writing papers. In Japan, if a student doesn't do well in math, the answer is to do more math and work harder at it. Too often in America, students get away with saying, "My brain's just not that good at math. My grandfather wasn't good at math. My Aunt Gladys wasn't good at it. Math just doesn't run in my family." The result? Japanese students are much better at math than American students. Some schools don't focus enough on basic subjects. Students spend a lot of time learning to respect the environment, but not so much time studying history. It comes as no surprise, then, when those students graduate without knowing what century the Civil War was fought in. Won't spending more money on schools fix things? We need to pay teachers a lot more if we want better schools. We need more computers in classrooms. If Washington would spend more money on schools instead of tanks and missiles, education would be a lot better. It's easy to think that if we just dumped more money into the system, things would improve. But we've learned in the last several decades that money alone is not the answer. More dollars do not guarantee better schools. Some schools spend a lot of money and get poor results. Other schools with fewer resources give children a fine education. As a society, we invest enormous sums in education, and expenditures keep climbing. The United States spends an average of $13,500 per year on each public school student. That's far more than most other countries spend. Most money spent on public schools comes from local and state taxes. Federal funds from Washington, D.C. supply roughly 1 out of every $10 spent on education up through high school. As the graph below shows, since 1970, America has poured more and more money into educating students. Yet during that same period, test results have remained mostly flat. Good education is largely about effort and focusing on things that matter. Spending more money on schools won't help unless other changes happen. Can't Washington fix schools for us? There's an old story about the Greek mathematician Euclid, who taught geometry around 300 BC in Alexandria, Egypt. King Ptolemy heard of his fabulous calculations and asked for some instruction. Euclid started to explain some basic theorems, but the king soon interrupted. "I have little time," he said. "Is there no easier road to the mastery of this subject?" Euclid gently replied, "Sire, there is no royal road to geometry." As in math, there is no royal road to education reform. There are no quick or easy answers. It's especially hard to fix American schools from Washington, D.C. Think about a class you took that wasn't particularly good. Maybe there were disruptive students in the room, or an uninspiring teacher, or a boring textbook. Whatever the problem, there is no lever a senator can pull or button the president can push to fix that class. Washington, D.C. is simply too far removed. Washington has tried. In 2001, during the administration of President George W. Bush, Congress passed the No Child Left Behind Act to improve student achievement. In 2009, President Barack Obama launched a program called Race to the Top to encourage reform. Between the two programs, we've spent billions of dollars. It's hard to see that education has improved much, if at all. Generally speaking, schools work best when local communities are in charge of them, not bureaucrats in faraway places. People who live near a particular school, who send their children there and see what kinds of students it produces, know best what that school needs. A school in Boston might have very different problems from a school in Omaha or Los Angeles. That's why Americans have left most education decisions in the hands of local and state officials, not the federal government in Washington. Fixing education is mostly a bottom-up, school-by-school process. It starts with parents, teachers, and principals, and it takes the dedication of whole communities. What makes schools get better? Here are 10 basic principles of education reform that conservatives adhere to. Parents are the first and most important teachers. Their efforts and expectations make all the difference. The more involved they are, the better their children's chances of getting a good education. When they remove themselves from the learning process, those chances plummet. Schools can't function well without parents' help. They can't replace the care a parent can offer. Schools have to set high expectations for all students. Here, the old saying, "aim high," applies. Schools that maintain high standards get higher achievement from students. Schools that offer dumbed-down lessons and slipshod standards get little in return. Not all students have the same abilities, of course, so teachers must adapt lessons to appropriate levels. But all students should be challenged and expected to meet solid standards. Requiring any less is selling young people short. Schools must be safe and orderly places. Discipline and academic success go hand in hand. Where there is chaos, little learning occurs. In good schools, the rules are clear and enforced. The teacher is the moral authority in the classroom with the responsibility to tell students how to behave. Parents and school officials back teachers up and make it clear to students that they must respect teachers' authority. Schools should focus above all on academics. Good schools are temples of learning. They present a clear, specific curriculum that states what students are expected to learn each year. That curriculum attends to the basics: English, history, math, science, and the arts. Most of the day is devoted to these core subjects. Good schools don't clutter the curriculum with so many other topics that the basics get pushed aside. They concentrate on essential skills: reading, writing, and speaking English well, analyzing and solving problems, thinking clearly and precisely. Schools must help parents develop good character in students. As the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, we must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Good schools teach about right and wrong. They help young people acquire virtues such as self-discipline, diligence, perseverance, and honesty. Teachers cultivate these traits largely by helping students form good habits, getting to class on time, being thorough about assignments, speaking respectfully to others. Knowledge is as important as skills. Some schools are big on teaching critical thinking, but not on mastering factual knowledge. They view memorizing facts as old-fashioned. But knowledge, knowing things, makes you smarter. You can't do much critical thinking about any topic without first knowing some things about it. There are some facts and ideas that all American students should know. What a right triangle is, where the Mississippi River is, what happened in 1776. Good schools have a clear vision of the knowledge they want to transmit. Good schools teach civic virtues. They help students learn to be responsible citizens. They help them learn to respect others and live up to obligations. They offer a good dose of American history, including events that tie us together as a people. The Constitutional Convention of 1787, the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, the March on Washington in 1963. They teach the central principles that underlie American democracy. They acquaint students with their rights as well as their duties to this country. Schools should be held accountable for results. They should be judged by how much their students learn. For a long time, public schools resisted the idea of making sure that students meet certain standards. In recent years, states have tried to correct this problem by coming up with standards in different subjects that schools must follow. The reform has been more successful in some places than others. There is still work to be done. But overall, it makes good sense that schools spell out exactly what they will teach students and then be held accountable for meeting those goals. Good teachers should be rewarded. Bad teachers should be given the opportunity to improve. If they don't get better, they should be dismissed. Most teachers are capable, dedicated professionals. But there are bad teachers as well. If you've had one, you've probably wondered, why don't they get rid of someone this bad? Unions, such as the National Education Association, have made it extremely difficult for principals to get those teachers out of classrooms. Sometimes it can take years of jumping through bureaucratic hoops. That's because the unions want to protect jobs. But putting jobs ahead of students' educations is wrong. In most professions, good work gets you rewarded, and bad work gets you a pink slip. Many schools would be better places with that approach. Families should have the right to choose the schools their children attend. In many places, the public school system assigns children to schools. This helps ensure that schools have a mix of students with different races and backgrounds, which is good. But there are downsides. Students sometimes get assigned to bad schools or schools that don't fit them well. That's wrong. Wealthy families get to choose their schools either by purchasing houses in neighborhoods with good public schools or by paying for good private schooling. Poor children, however, often find themselves trapped in bad schools. Many places have been offering more school choice in recent years, which is a good development. If parents are unhappy with a school, they should be able to take their children elsewhere. Are some things more important to learn than others? Conservatives believe that schools should transmit knowledge of important ideas, works, and principles from one generation to the next. Students should be exposed to great works of literature like Hamlet and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. They should know what the First Amendment means and what happened on D-Day. They should see images of great works of art like the Mona Lisa and hear great compositions like Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. Such things are part of the culture all Americans have inherited. the common culture as it is sometimes called. These things are part of the glue that holds us together as a people. They help tell us who we are. Most educators agree that it's important to teach about our common culture, but many schools do a poor job of it. For example, only about 1 in 10 American high school seniors has a solid grasp of American history. That goes a long way toward explaining why most American adults have a hard time answering questions like, what are the 3 branches of the U.S. government? Who decides what is most important to teach? Sometimes there are disagreements about particulars, but for the most part, it is a matter of consensus. Time is often the judge. The works of Socrates and Michelangelo, for example, have stood the test of time. It is not a good idea for the federal government to dictate what American students should learn for 2 reasons. First, if Washington was in charge, scores of different groups would lobby to influence the curriculum, and the result would most likely be a political mess. Second, there would be a terrible temptation for the federal government to influence people's lives by controlling what they learn. Far better to leave curricula up to the wisdom of parents, teachers, communities, and states across the country. Higher education. In the 2012 presidential race, according to Federal Election Commission data, 96% of all campaign contributions from Ivy League faculty and employees went to Barack Obama. 96%. There was more disagreement among the old Soviet Politburo than there is among Ivy League donors. That statistic should give us pause, and I say that as someone who endorsed President Obama for re-election, because let me tell you, neither party has a monopoly on truth or God on its side. When 96% of Ivy League donors prefer one candidate to another, you have to wonder whether students are being exposed to the diversity of views that a great university should offer. Great universities must not become predictably partisan, and a liberal arts education must not be an education in the art of liberalism. The role of universities is not to promote an ideology. It is to provide scholars and students with a neutral forum for researching and debating issues, without tipping the scales in one direction or repressing unpopular views. Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, addressing the graduating class of Harvard University, May 29, 2014. America has the finest system of colleges and universities in the world. It includes some of the best facilities, professors, and students anywhere. But it also has some big problems. Colleges like to think of themselves as places where free speech, free debate, and free thought flourish. In fact, these days the opposite is often true. Many campuses are places where conservative ideas are reviled, shut out, and shouted down. Some professors go out of their way to sour young people on traditional American values like patriotism, trust in God, and enthusiasm for free enterprise. There was a time when colleges played a role in sharpening not only the intellect, but the moral sensibilities of students. On many campuses, senior year included a seminar with a name like The Moral Life, taught by the college president, who was first and foremost a moral figure. Those days are long gone. Aside from freshman orientations on issues like sexual assault, most universities steer clear of moral guidance. American colleges claim that they give students good educations. Sometimes they do. But too often students graduate having learned little, or they don't graduate at all. Students and their parents like to think that going to college is a good financial move. After all, college graduates generally make more money than people without a college diploma. But many college students graduate every year with huge student loan debts that take years to pay off, and many graduates struggle to find good jobs. Are colleges biased? Yes, they're among the most left-leaning places in the country. Not all are liberal. Some are not partisan one way or another, and there are even a handful of colleges out there, mainly Christian colleges, that are conservative. But overall, the majority of public and private universities are ruled by leftist thought. Just about every liberal cause you can think of has strong support from college faculties, from promoting abortion rights to saving the world from climate change. Departments that teach the humanities and social sciences, literature, philosophy, history, the arts, political science, women's studies, etc., are most likely to be hotbeds of liberalism. Departments that teach science, mathematics, and engineering tend to be less biased, or at least less vocal about politics. Surveys confirm that liberal professors dominate college faculties. Consider, for example, the chart below, based on data from the Higher Education Research Institute, which periodically surveys faculty members across the nation. Another study has found that in the humanities and social sciences, Democratic professors outnumber Republican professors by at least 7 to 1. In some places, it's far worse than that. For example, surveys in the University of California system found the ratio of Democrats to Republicans among history professors to be 26 to 1 at UC San Diego. At UC Santa Barbara, it was 28 to 1. At UC Berkeley, it was 31 to 1. U.S. colleges love to boast about diversity on their campuses. Diversity in race, gender, class, nationality, sexuality, and any other number of ways to group people. But when it comes to the political ideology of the faculty, they are anything but diversified. The liberalizing of college faculties dates to the 1960s and 1970s, when liberal ideas heavily influenced the culture. Many conservatives believe that colleges discriminate against them when it comes to hiring faculty. The numbers suggest they are right. Colleges are supposed to be places where ideas are shared and debated. Having faculty members who mostly think the same is not a recipe for stimulating minds. It is a recipe for conformity of thought. Are conservative ideas tolerated on college campuses? On some campuses they aren't. Conservative ideas are mocked, shut down, or simply given a cold shoulder. It comes across that there only is a liberal campus, one student at Northeastern University in Boston told an ABC News reporter. That's how I felt most of the way in college so far, that there is no room for conservatives there. I know I have, or my friends have, spoken up about their views in political science classes, and we get beaten down and laughed at. She added, "The faculty are, I don't want to say oppressive, but they are very not open to other views." In 2014, the College Republican National Committee began a Twitter campaign called #MyLiberalCampus, encouraging students to share their experiences with liberal bias. The tweets poured in. "My professor called Republicans brain dead," one reported. "My media ethics professor demanding that skeptics of global warming have no place in media coverage about the topic," another tweeted. "A professor asked Republicans to raise our hands and said, 'Oh, Republicans, I wish that there were more of you, on Mars,'" another wrote. For commencement addresses, colleges love liberal speakers. In 2014, the Young America's Foundation analyzed who had been invited to address graduating seniors at the nation's top colleges. Liberal speakers outnumbered conservatives by nearly 5 to 1. Some professors and students are so intolerant they try to silence any voice they find objectionable. Protesters at several universities have managed to torpedo speaking invitations offered to conservatives. For example, in 2014, a group of Rutgers University faculty and students raised a fuss when they learned that Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State under President George W. Bush, had been invited to give a commencement address. They disapproved of her role in the Iraq War. The protest caused Rice to withdraw as the speaker. She joined a long list of conservatives targeted by closed-minded liberals on campuses around the country. Do colleges indoctrinate students with liberal ideas? Capitalism means exploitation and greed. Racism is the fabric of the American flag. We need more government to solve our problems. Those are the kinds of messages colleges often indoctrinate students with. If you're a college student or are heading to college, chances are good that your campus will be a setting that tries to persuade young people that progressive thought is good and forward-thinking, and that conservative thought is foolish and even immoral. You may well run across professors who use the classroom to promote their political views. You may even be unlucky enough to fall into the hands of a professor or two who, like one recorded at Eastern Connecticut State University, tells students that Republicans want things to go back not to 1955, but to 1855, and that conservatives are racist, misogynist, money-grubbing people who do not want black people to vote, do not want Latinos to vote, do not want old people to vote, or young people to vote. Sitting in classes taught through leftist perspectives, such as one that studies environmental racism and ecological injustice in the United States, or one that teaches how social control dependent on power, privilege, and advantage continues to perpetuate sexism and racism. If your college is like most in the United States, you'll see professors driving cars with bumper stickers supporting liberal candidates. Eyes will roll at the mention of Fox News or Ronald Reagan. The faculty senate may pass resolutions supporting liberal policies. You'll see rallies supporting liberal causes like abortion rights and hear snickering comments about conservatives, especially conservative Christians. Not all colleges are bastions of leftist thought, but many are, and their message to students is to think like a liberal. Aren't professors smarter than the rest of us about how the world should work? Surely someone who has a PhD has to know what he or she is talking about, right? No. That professor knows more than you about a highly specialized area, like medieval literature or existential philosophy. That does not mean his or her solutions to the world's problems are right. More education does not equal more smarts about politics. Many professors are so insulated in the liberal bubble of academia that they have very little experience with ideas outside of it. They barely know the arguments on the conservative side. Is it a good idea to challenge liberal professors? It depends on the professor. Many instructors welcome debate and engage with students in a good-spirited way. But some are narrow-minded, rude, and petty about any dissent. You have to take measure of who you are dealing with. If appropriate, by all means speak up and challenge the liberal line. A friendly debate of ideas is what college is supposed to be about. You don't want to get into the habit of being afraid to stand for your principles. Debate will sharpen your mind and strengthen your arguments. It forces you to examine your beliefs carefully and articulate them clearly. It requires you to know what the other side is saying and how best to refute it. Be courteous when challenging a professor or other students, even if they are not. Civility will help you make good points, think clearly, and have intelligent conversations. At some point, you may face a professor who penalizes dissent from liberal views. A UC Santa Barbara student in a sociology course reported, "One of the questions on the multiple-choice final for the class asked, 'What system is based on the division and exploitation of classes?' The answer to the question was capitalism, and in order to receive a good grade on the test, I was forced to select that answer, although I did not agree." At times like that, it may be best to simply do the work required to get a good grade and move on. Why study great Western thoughts, ideas, and works? There was a time when American colleges made sure that students graduated with a solid grounding in the history and achievements of Western civilization, including its literature, philosophy, religion, art, music, and scientific accomplishments. The curriculum examined great works and individuals, from ancient Greek and Jewish cultures up through modern times, including the history of the United States. Think, for example, of the Bible, Homer, Beethoven, and Michelangelo, or the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address. Through the study of great works, students learned how to think critically, write well, and apply lessons to new situations. Practically all colleges have abandoned this idea of making sure that students receive a good classical education through a core curriculum. Instead, they present students with catalogs full of choices that might include classes on the music of Lady Gaga or introduction to popular TV and movies. At many universities, students can graduate without taking a single course in American history or without ever having studied great works from the likes of Shakespeare or Leonardo da Vinci. There are several reasons why colleges no longer require studies in Western civilization. One is that schools have broadened what they teach to include topics that were once left out, such as the achievements of women, African Americans, and non-Western cultures. This inclusion is a good thing, but it often pushes aside classes on Western civilization. Some liberal professors don't like the idea of focusing studies on Western civilization or any works produced by dead white males. In their view, the main legacy of the West is one of greed, oppression, racism, and exploitation. They are wrong. The great works of Western civilization represent our culture's most magnificent thoughts and creations. They offer guidance when asking the great questions of life, questions such as, what is good? What should I hope for? How should I live? They teach us about virtues such as courage, honor, justice, and compassion. Western civilization has shaped our country and our lives. It has given us our highest ideals. It has brought a long list of advances for humanity, from the scientific method to the world's most just and effective system of government, representative democracy. All of our modern institutions are in some way the product of Western thought. How can we understand ourselves if we don't attempt to explore our past? As the Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski pointed out, in a culture in which your past is denied, you remain alien to yourself. The story of the West is by no means perfect. Some of the chapters are dark, and they should be studied as well. But overall, the Western record stands extraordinarily high. Studying it tells us who we are and where we came from. Ignoring it makes for a poorer education. Is it worth it to pay a lot of money for college? This is a question that every student and parent, or anyone who is paying for a college education, should ask. It's the kind of question that good fiscal conservatives ask. Is the product worth the cost? There's been a lot of negative news surrounding higher education lately. Many graduates are having a hard time finding good jobs. There are a lot of bitter young people out there who are waiting tables while they look for other employment. They are thinking, I'll be paying off my college loans forever. It's fair to ask exactly what they got for all that tuition money. The ugly truth is that at many undergraduate colleges, not all that much learning goes on. Universities have dumbed down their standards and expectations. Many students spend much more time partying, hanging out, and playing video games than they do studying. A report from the National Association of Scholars states, a considerable body of evidence now shows that recent college graduates are poorly educated and are in general poorly prepared for the post-college workplace. Employers seem to agree. 84% of employers rate college graduates as unprepared or only somewhat prepared to succeed in the workplace. Another problem is that some subjects might be a delight to study, but don't make it easy to find jobs after college. That's especially true for majors like fine arts, anthropology, philosophy, and literature. Fair or not, they don't hold a lot of attraction for many employers. But you don't have to despair about your higher education choices. Here are 4 questions to consider when thinking about going to college. Who am I? Many students go to college only because they think it's what's expected of them. They may go because all their friends are going, or maybe they just want to party for 4 years. These are not the right motives for attending school. The right motives are ideas like wanting to get a good job someday, which doesn't always require having a college degree, and a desire to commit to serious learning. Many people never get completely honest with themselves about whether they are college-ready material or not. Many don't finish college because they discover they can't or don't want to do the work required. Make sure you're ready to knuckle down and complete that degree if you go. Your performance in high school will be a good indicator of your college readiness. If you don't think you're ready, consider going to community college or getting into the rhythm of school in a less demanding setting. If you're not ready to attend college and do a lot of reading, writing, and lecture listening, vocational or trade school may be for you. There's also nothing wrong with just working for a while. Where am I going? Not all colleges are created equal. Some have very famous alumni, magnificent reputations, and world-class faculty. Others are institutions that very few people have heard of. In general, going to a really good school will give you a leg up when you go to look for a job. Employers will likely think you're smart if you've graduated from Duke, Rice, or the University of Michigan. That doesn't mean your future is dim if you don't go to a big-name school. Just make sure you don't pay a fortune to go somewhere that doesn't merit it. A degree from a top liberal arts or research school like Stanford, New York University, or Emory may be worth the cost, but an expensive private school that isn't so highly regarded may not. Go to payscale.com and check out its helpful charts. They'll tell you the average cost of attendance at each school and the expected lifetime earnings of its graduates. What am I going to study? This is a very important question. You may feel comfortable borrowing money for school if you study disciplines that are in high demand or pay well. These days, graduates who have studied STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math subjects, like petroleum engineering, computer science, and industrial chemistry, generally make better salaries right out of school than liberal arts and social science majors. Think history, philosophy, English, psychology, communications. Jobs in STEM fields are also usually easier to find. Of course, how much money you can make shouldn't be the main consideration in choosing a field of study. There are other questions to take into account, like, will I be happy in that field? And where do my talents and interests lie? Still, it's smart to keep in mind that although there are many wonderful benefits to studying subjects like foreign languages, art history, or sociology, those degrees may not get you a job as easily or earn you as much money, at least initially, as other degrees like nursing, accounting, and finance. Again, it might be useful to explore payscale.com to see which majors pay best. How much will I have to borrow? College tuition has tripled over the last 3 decades, adjusted for inflation. The cost of 1 year at a private university equals, on average, more than half of an American family's income. Students have been borrowing more and more to pay for college. The average debt load for seniors graduating in 2014 was about $33,000. Some owe much more than that, even into the $100,000 plus range. Before you go to school, be sure you're making a smart financial choice. Will it be worth it to borrow $60,000 to study anthropology at an unknown school? Probably not. Will it be worth it to borrow $60,000 to study computer science at the University of Texas? Probably, since it's a well-known school that's relatively affordable, offering a major that employers covet. When thinking about how much to borrow, remember that one day your desires in life will change. Your deepest desire to study Shakespeare today might seem worth fulfilling at any price. But a few years down the line, when you are grabbed by the desire for a new car, a down payment on a home, or an engagement ring, you might regret borrowing a lot of money for a degree that hasn't amounted to a good return on investment. It pays to be realistic about some hard-nosed questions. Will I get my money's worth at that school? How hard will it be to find a job with that major? How am I going to pay off my student loans? Would I be better off someplace more affordable? These are difficult questions to ponder if you're in college or headed to college. The good news is that you can get a good education at most colleges if you choose courses wisely and study hard. If you do that, you'll be ahead of the game compared to most graduates. Conclusion. We began this book by outlining several principles that conservatives hold, summarized by the acronym FLINT: Free Enterprise, Limited Government, Individual Liberty, National Defense, and Traditional Values. All of the issues discussed in these pages touch on one or more of those principles. Taken together, they help inform a conservative vision for this country. The United States was founded on these principles, and its strength still lies in them. Each generation has the responsibility to explain them to the next, to help younger Americans understand why they are good and what they have meant to the world. That conversation helps ensure a promising future. It helps keep America strong. What kind of country do conservatives want America to be? Conservatives understand that the culture shapes and reflects people's values. They want American culture to be one that helps transmit good values from one generation to another, virtues like honesty, hard work, and generosity of spirit. Families are crucial to the task of transmitting such virtues. Conservatives want America to be a place where the institution of marriage is strong. They want children to have, whenever possible, the benefit of growing up with a mother and father in the home. When that's not possible, they want children to have strong adult role models to help nurture and teach them. Families need the help of the entire culture. The conservative vision of America is one in which all of the little platoons of society, churches, synagogues, neighborhood associations, schools, businesses, and volunteer groups work to make communities good, healthy places to live. Religion plays a special role in that mix. Conservatives are strong defenders of people's right to worship, or not to worship, as they see fit. Faith is a matter of the heart and should never be forced or required of anyone. But conservatives also believe that religion helps make America a good place. They want the United States to continue to be a nation where faith in God is strong and where churches and other houses of worship flourish. Conservatives want schools to be places with high expectations that focus on academics and help parents develop good character in students. Schools should teach the knowledge, skills, and values that enable young Americans to become good citizens and prosper in a free economy. That includes teaching about the principles upon which this country was founded, ideals such as that all people are created equal and that all have the right to think and speak freely. It includes an honest teaching about America's past and an explanation that, despite its flaws, this nation is one of the greatest nations in history. Conservatives want schools to help raise patriots who are grateful to live in this country and who want to improve it. Conservatives believe that our laws should be colorblind. They want the United States to be known as the best place on earth to be a minority. They believe we should continue our long tradition of welcoming immigrants to our shores, but that our borders must be safe and secure, and that immigrants should come here legally, respecting our laws. One measure of any society is how well it protects its most vulnerable members. Conservatives believe society should protect the lives of unborn babies, the most vulnerable and innocent among us. Conservatives recognize that free enterprise is the engine that has made the United States an economic powerhouse. They want a strong American free enterprise system that offers a good standard of living and economic opportunity to the most people. Conservatives envision a federal government equal to the task of serving a great and powerful nation. That means one that protects citizens' liberties and rights, but does not try to run their lives. One that helps tackle big issues, but does not claim to be the solution to every problem that comes along. It means a national government that doesn't hog all the power and that respects people's rights to govern themselves through state and local governments. There are some things that the federal government in Washington, D.C. must do. One of them is to defend the country from enemies. Conservatives want America to maintain the strongest military in the world to protect our freedom and to stand up to tyranny when necessary. We all have an obligation to help those in true need, especially here in the most prosperous nation on earth. Conservatives recognize that government plays an important role in providing that help, but also that there is only so much government can do. We all have an obligation for good stewardship of the earth. Conservatives expect government to help protect the environment. They also expect government to recognize that good stewardship involves putting the earth's resources to work in sensible ways that benefit people. Conservatives expect government to handle these tasks with smart, efficient programs, not programs that just throw money at problems and waste taxpayer dollars. Government should operate under the same financial reality that American families have to live by. It should balance its budget, spending only as much money as it receives. American democracy is based on the idea of personal responsibility, a free people making sound decisions for themselves, both in the voting booth and in everyday life. Conservatives want a country where citizens know that liberty comes with responsibility, where people respect the rights of others, obey the law, and are accountable for their actions. Conservatives don't buy into grand promises that government can make sweeping changes that make people's problems go away. But they want a good society and sound government. They believe that as long as America remembers its founding principles and strives to live up to them, it can be a great country. We hope you've enjoyed America the Strong, an Oasis audio production. Text copyright 2015 by William J. Bennett and John T. Cribb. Production copyright 2015 by Oasis Audio under arrangement with Tyndale House Publishers. Oasis Audio titles are available wherever audiobooks are sold and on our website, oasisaudio.com.